Take a look at these hands. Take a look at these hands. Hey guys, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here, investigating your favorite albums. And yeah, let's talk about Talking Heads, Remain in Light. So, Talking Heads is a band formed in New York, USA in the 1970s, and they are apparently from the same root, from the same seed, or more like from the same soil that also grew amazing bands and artists like Sonic Youth and Patti Smith and Television. And we also have Talking Heads, and they are basically a new wave post punk funk band. And given that they are a band from the late 70s and early 80s, they're actually super duper ahead of their time. They're actually extremely progressive because the kind of music they make is unlike most of the contemporaries they have back in the days, because their music, the Talking Heads music, are usually very eccentric, very wild, kind of experimental, in a sense that they sort of combine the more fun and wild and aggressive aspects of punk and sort of infuse them with all sorts of bits of electronic music, sort of dance pop and funk influenced music as well. Also a bit of disco. So, their music is absolutely eccentric, and it's absolutely forward thinking and extremely ahead of its time. Anyways, Remain in Light is not their debut album. They had dropped like a couple of albums before Remain in Light, and before Remain in Light, their music is like a bit more progressive than, your usual late 70s, early 80s punk. Uh, Also, check out the song Psycho Killer, which is absolutely fantastic of a track. But it is on the album Remain in Light where they actually start to heavily mix between disco pop and synth funk with post punk and other kinds of musical genres together. And the way they blend them both together is so vibrant, it's so wild. What the heck is that? Okay, we're good, we're safe. It's the way they blend these genres together is so vibrant, it's so wild and eccentric and exciting, and it's just extremely forward thinking. The band members consist of the one and only, the legendary David Byrne, as well as Chris France, Tina Weymouth, and Jerry Harrison. But this album, Remain in Light, is actually produced by the legendary Brian Eno, who is absolutely one of the most important musical artists in history, in my opinion. Brian freaking Eno, okay? He is a master at producing music, and he had also came out with a lot of legendary ambient records on his own. So, this album, Remain in Light, alternative rock, post-punk, funk, new wave, dance, pop, disco, all mixed together. The instrumentals are insane because they are so layered. There's so many layers on the instrumentals on this record, and the way they're assembled and looped is very creative and innovative. And when you talk about the layers of instrumentals on this album, it's like peeling an onion because there are just so many layers. We have bits of chunky bass, herky jerky guitars that are sometimes very springy and ragged. We have polyrhythms, we have different hand drums and drum beats, horns, sometimes even strings, and then we have these sound effects that are just vocally layered on top of one another. They're all very creative, and it's very impressive how they assembled the instrumentals on this album. And given that there are only like 8 tracks on this album, it's kind of crazy how solid this album is, but at the same time, diverse, versatile. Like, none of the songs on this album sound similar to one another. They're all special on their own. The first track being Born Under Punches, The Heat Goes On, and it is an absolutely stellar opening to an album, in my opinion. We get the yelp in the beginning, and then we get these very funky, awesome instrumentals, and the guitars, the little guitar licks, They are funky but yet slightly melancholic. I really love that tone. I really love the clunky, jerky bass of this track. The beats on this track, they're bleeping and blooping, they're going left and right. It's all very sporadic but also layered and dense. And then once in a while we get these diddly guitars, and also the very freaky, glitchy guitar solo in the middle of the track, which I absolutely love. And then we have David Byrne's really wild and eccentric delivery on this track. Just take a look at these hands, take a look at these hands. This hand speaks, the hand of a government man. And then later on we get these group vocal refrains, goes on, and the heat goes on. And then these repeated refrains of all I want is to breathe. So this track is about the suppression of the government, but it's written in a way it's abstract, and it also takes on a whole new perspective on, the government, maybe someone who works for the government themselves sort of also being suppressed at the same time, and how he or she just doesn't want to be in that position, but it's just very unfortunate that he or she just ends up working for the government. The next track is Crosseyed and Painless, and this track and the third track, The Great Curve, are also two very speedy, very fiery tracks. The former, being Cross-Eyed and Painless, feels like a 70s vintage action comedy soundtrack, in my opinion, with the very sporadic, crazy hand drums and also the speedy, dense, fiery bass, twinkly percussion. And on this track, David Byrne sort of talks a lot about lines and shapes and formulas and knives and facts, and it's all coming together, and it feels very abstract, but it's actually a track about losing your identity, not knowing who you really are, not knowing who you're cut out to be. The next track, it also feels very sporadic and dense and fiery. This time the guitars, they're springy, they're really ragged and jagged. We also get these very crazy, very fast-paced hand drums, which are a really nice touch on the track. And this track is essentially about feeling anxious, about not being able to understand the world, to be able to understand the universe. And not gonna lie, there's a certain tone of this track that makes you feel kind of anxious as well. Also, again, the vocal layers, they're fantastic. There are like 3 or 4 layers of vocals throughout this track at different paces with different tones, and they just sound very fantastic when they all come together. And also we have lyrics like, she's moving by remote control, so it's about control as well. This track is about how everything's sort of being manipulated and controlled, because we have this imagery of a woman dancing, but she's actually being controlled. So there's that. The fourth track is Once in a Lifetime, and this track is a banger. It is one of the most popular tracks of the 80s, and nowadays a lot of people know about this track as well, because it's a very crazy track. It's a crazy ass track. First of all, we have the very iconic bass line of this thing, bam 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 bam. And then we also get the very sweet, very blissful, soaring chorus. But whenever we enter the verses, it's this but somewhat unsettling spoken word verse where David Byrne sounds like a preacher. He sounds like a priest of sorts. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? And you may find yourself behind large wheels of a beautiful automobile. And you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And this track is essentially about how fast the society moves, and also not being afraid of the fast passage of time, because everyone grows up to, get a family, get a job, get a house, get a car, and it's just how the society works. That's just how people be, and sometimes we don't really stop and go, well, what the heck? How did I get here? And it's sort of like, wow, time has really passed. And that is a sentiment that I think every single person in the world over the age of 15 would also relate to. So there's that. But also, I really love the layered instrumentals of this thing. The very plinky, planky percussion on this track. Again, the bass, how chunky and jerky it is. David Byrne's wild, preachy vocals. All of them come together to form an extremely memorable combination of sounds. And that is why this track is one of the most popular tracks of the 80s. Also, check out the music video. Oh my gosh, check out the music video. Anyways, the album sort of slows down on the second half. Starting off, we have the track House in Motion. It's not a very slow song, but it's definitely slower than the 4 previous tracks. Instrumentally, it is still fantastic. We get these very amazing gummy bass, bubbly guitars, also these squeaky sweet horns. And together, while they are slower and a little more low key, they still sound accessible. They still sound exciting and fun. And the verses are these very quiet, whispery spoken word. But then in the choruses, you get David Byrne's very yelpy vocals. And this track is essentially about the fragility of life. How easy is it to die? Next track, the album slows down even further with Seen and Not Seen. And this track is a full-on spoken word track, but it is a fantastic spoken word track. It is tracks like this that inspire amazing tracks like LCD Sound System's I'm losing my edge. I think that's the name of the track. It's tracks like this, and boy, I love the instrumentals on this track. Usually I'm not crazy about spoken word tracks, but given how stone cold is David Byrne's delivery on this track, and how weird and odd and abstract the lyrics are, and then given how amazing the instrumentals are, I absolutely love this track. I mean, the instrumentals, they are watery, they're enveloping. We get these very jumpy, loud, crispy drums, while at the same time, bubbly, soft keyboards that are very, very soft, as well as sparse bass that just sort of jumps around a little bit from time to time. And essentially, this track is about faces. More like this guy, he's seeing all these celebrities on, the TV, the magazine, and he's like, oh, if I keep on imagining that I have these faces, one day my face will actually change and become these faces, which is really weird. It's like morphing, basically. It's like metamorphosis, basically. It's really, really weird, but that's also one of the reasons why I think this is a very special album. Its abstraction is what really fascinates me. Anyways, the next track, it slows down even further. It's very sparse and primordial, at the same time very relaxing and dreamy. Very, very heavy reverb, reminds me a lot of late 70s, early 80s sort of movie soundtracks or songs in general. They're all very heavy in reverb and very sparse. I love the tippy-tappy percussion and what it sounds like to be Chinese strings. And the vocals are whispery, they're haunting, and this track is essentially about the invasion of Americanism, where we sort of see the whole story in the perspective of a local by the name of Mojik, and how he saw that Americans are starting to colonize their land and how much he wants to terrorize Americans, basically. Mojik is essentially a terrorist. But it's a very interesting perspective to look at things. And it's the 1980s, okay? So it's a very, very progressive lyrical topic. And then the album sort of ends off with the Overload, which is the longest song on the album at a little bit over 6 minutes. And it's a very, very stagnant song, like stagnant. Nothing happens on this track. It's like, it reminds me a lot of Joy Division, especially the last track off of Unknown Pleasures, where it's just this very dreary dystopian wall of sound. And it actually kind of reminds me of that Pink Floyd song Sorrow as well, because it has a similar guitar tone to it. It's just very bold, very loud, but also very, just dystopian and broken. and the whole track is simply like that. And while I wish that there is more dynamic going on in the track, I gotta appreciate how consistent it sounds. It just sounds like a wall of sound. It just sounds like a chunk of sound, and it's meant to create this very dreary atmosphere, and I really appreciate that. So yeah, overall, I pretty much enjoy every single track on this album. I mean, again, the last track. I'm not a huge fan of the last track, though I understand why people would enjoy or appreciate the last track. I think David Byrne's performances on this album is absolutely fantastic. I think the layered instrumentals and the production is some of the most forward-thinking and innovative in musical history ever. And also, people are texting in group chat. I think the lyrics, how abstract they are, and how much they talk about the society without directly just talking about the society, is just really fantastic. And overall, I really enjoy this album. It's nearly perfect in my opinion, nearly a perfect score. My favorite track here is Once in a Lifetime. Actually, I really, really love Born Under Punches. I really, really freaking love that track. And my least favorite is the last track, The Overload. I am giving Talking Heads Remain in Light a strong 9 out of 10. Yay! So have you listened to the Talking Heads album Remain in Light? From 1 to 10, how much you rate it? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more. And thanks for watching. I will be reviewing G-Eazy, Haim, Chloe and Hall very soon. Also more classic albums with the likes of Led Zeppelin, Mad Villainy, and some more that I will not reveal this early.